What's up, everyone? Time for another episode of Mythic Conversations. Thank you all for joining Wednesday nights. This is the place to be, right? It is if you want to talk Mythic Legions, if you want to talk Mythic Legions customizing and everything around that. Excited. Interesting show tonight. Last week we did kind of a show about larger scale figures. So last week was all about the ogre scale figures. So I thought that this week I would flip it on its head and go the exact opposite route. If you saw the photo that I posted today on my social media accounts, I posted a photo of a gnome. So I like the idea of looking at some of the smaller scale figures. And I don't necessarily mean dwarves and goblins. They're the smallest scale figures we have in Mythic Legions currently, but actually going even smaller than that, and how you can maybe do some customs that bring some other races like pixies and gnomes and so forth into your version of the realm of Mythos. But before we get started on that, let's kick the show off like every single week. Welcome to Mythic Conversations. If you've never joined before and you are unfamiliar with who I am, my name is Jeremy Gerard. I'm a Mythic Legions collector and customizer, and I also have the distinct privilege of working with Four Horsemen Studios as their digital marketing manager. That means that everything you see at sourcehorseman.com is content that I help bring to you. If you want more information about my work and my customs, you can check me out on my Instagram page. That's at Mythic Customs, or on my website, www.mythiccustoms. Additionally, I'm here every Wednesday night doing this show, Mythic Conversations. This is where we talk Mythic Legions, we talk Mythic Legions customizing, we talk Mythic Legions news, and again, it's a conversation. So there is back and forth. There's a chat feature right here in YouTube, in the YouTube live channel. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any comments on what I'm showing, hit me up in the chat and we'll have that conversation. We've already got some people chatting to me currently. Drew Rosedale, Blue Collar Gear, thank you for joining. What's up to all of you as well? So, like I said, tonight's show, we're going to look at some of the smaller scale figures. I also actually have the PowerCon debut figures on the table behind me, the Lord Dragul and the Dorino Onerous. I actually had them in hand last week and completely forgot to take them out to talk about them on the show, specifically from a customizing perspective. So we'll do that tonight before we get into kind of the topic at hand. Like every week, we start with Mythic Legions news. So big news is right now we've got the source, or the store horseman, I should say, pre-sale going on for Shadow Equidron. Yeah, thank you, Blue Collar. Yeah, this is an awesome shirt. I actually got this. Everyone, they made these for G-Con last year as part of the 20th anniversary. So it's got the 4H logo that they did. It's like a 4 and an H together, and it's got the 20. So it kind of says 4H20 or 420. It's funny to celebrate their 20 years in business. But as I was saying, Shadow Equidron, he's on sale. The pre-order's open right now. Talked about this on the show last week, because last week they had just announced that the sale was going to start on Friday. That sale did get started. I do know, I actually saw that there was some chatter. I guess there were some problems with the store when the sale first went live. It looks like that's been ironed out. Cornboy did mention on the Cabal that hopefully these problems will be a thing of the past soon. We have been working on the new Store Horseman. Cornboy said right in that post that we're hoping to launch that soon. They're hoping to launch that soon. I have nothing to do with the current store, but I am kind of leading the charge on the new store. So fingers crossed that all of these problems that we've had in the past go away and the new store is a pleasant shopping experience for all of us. So that's the big thing. Corn Boy in the studio haven't said how long that sale's going to go for. But they did kind of allude to it being a few weeks. So I can tell you this is not going to be like a massive pre-order that lasts for months and months, but it looks like you do have a few weeks to get in there and get your Shadow Echidron. $60 is what he is retailing for. Other sales that we talked about last week, obviously the Wolf King custom sale is going on right now. That goes on until this coming Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Actually, one of the pieces we're going to look at tonight is the piece that I posted today. That dwarf head, the monocle dwarf, that's one of the ones that is available right now, both unpainted. You can buy that piece unpainted, or there are a limited number of painted pieces available from Chris Hobby Lobby Middlecamp. Amazing paint jobs, amazing piece all in all that Emil Wickman sculpted. So if you're looking for that, I posted that today. I wanted to do something different with it. I saw it actually as a gnome versus a dwarf. I thought that would be a lot of fun. So that I think will be pretty cool. Again, we'll look at that in a bit. Blue Collar Collector, Blue Collar Gear. Glad the new store is in your capable hands. Yeah. E-commerce is definitely not my forte, but I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's going to work really well. So yeah, the Wolf King sale, that's going on. A lot of cool stuff there. We talked about that last week. There are some pieces that I painted personally for that sale. The red Fury Orc, like the angry orc head from Emil Wickman. I'm doing that one in red, while Steve Bouchatti's doing it in green, and Dustin Yoke, Masters of the Thunder Nerds, he's doing that in both the blue and the purple. Those are really cool because, the green one is awesome, but obviously green orcs are a little hard to come by. Red Fury Orcs, also a little hard to come by. Red Fury Orcs are available for pre-order on Big Bad Toy Store. So there are definitely some coming. You can get that pre-order in. But both the blue and the purple, I believe Chrono, the blue one, actually sold out recently. He's available for pre-order again. But there's a lot of them out there. I know a lot of people grabbed them recently, and purple are still available. So both those blue and purple options are nice because you can use them today. Other cool stuff going on. I'm painting the marine heads that Walter DeMarco for Mass Customs paint that he sculpted. He's also got a really cool like Viking warrior type head. It can either be used as a dwarf or a Viking. Again, painted pieces, both unpainted and painted. Chris Middlecamp's painting some of those as well. Also some of the other Emil Wickman dwarves. So check it out. wolfkingcustoms.com. A lot of cool stuff, but only available until this Saturday. Len did send out a kind of marketing email the other day teasing, actually promoting the sale. I think he sent it out before the sale, promoting the sale. And then at the end, he showed a teaser of a really cool demon head that Emil put together. I don't know that he knows when that's going to be available yet, but I believe he did mention, was it there? I think it was in the blog post. I think he posted a blog article on their website. On the website, there's a section called updates, and he usually posts different updates there and stuff. I've even posted, like when I did my painting video on how to paint the kitsune heads, I posted it there as well, so people had access to it. But he posted something in advance of the sale, kind of talking about what the sale was going to include. And in that, he did put a little teaser information that was cool to see get out there, that I don't know if people caught it or they glanced over it. But he mentioned that there's going to be an upcoming monsters sale. So it looks like October, it being, the spookiest month of the year. The theme for October is going to be more monster, and I don't really want to say horror focused, more monster and creature focused. That'll be cool. So that's October. Definitely looking forward to that. I know he's kind of ironing out some parts for that now, as well as for other sales that are coming, but that's down the road. Planetary Dog Toys, they also released a bunch of stuff on Saturday. I grabbed a bunch of stuff there. I grabbed the big fat body that they created that I've used before. They did that in 9-inch scale. Definitely a hefty price. It was $62 for that piece. it's got to be a giant hunk of resin. Knowing how big the ogres are and how big the normal big body is, I can only imagine when I get this piece in hand how hefty it's going to be. I mean, not going to lie, $62. I definitely took a step back and I said, "Oof, that's a big price tag. Do I want that?" I mean, it's honestly more than the base figure retailed for originally, but it's worth it to me. I think I got one. I think it's really going to allow me to do something cool. And as I've said before, these are, young independent artists, whether it's, Saba working and Julie working at Planetary, Len, Teal Titan, all of these people, the whole crew behind My Action Figure Customs. These are independent artists. This is something that they are doing, so it's cool to support them. So I was excited to get that. Can't wait to get that in. I also got some other heads, some of the dwarf style heads, but I got most of them in 9-inch. And kind of as a follow-up to the conversation we had last week where we were talking specifically about ogre customs. Yeah, I mean, the ogre scale figures are available. So the fact that Planetary Dog is doing the stuff in 9-inch, that's really, really cool. Give me some pieces to work with. Those are the only sales I know going on. I know MAFC has one coming up. It looks like they've still been showing stuff. Zombie just showed a really cool thing today that he took a bunch of the dwarf parts they've been teasing all month and kind of put them together in like a big dwarf tank looking figure. So that's pretty cool. I'm sure that sale is going to launch pretty soon as well. Definitely an expensive month. I hear you. A lot of dwarf parts, a lot of cool stuff to buy. But remember, everyone was saying for a while, they're like, "Oh, there's no Mythic Legions to buy. There's no Mythic Legions." I was listening to LegionsCast the other day, and they were talking about how these 3D companies have really helped fill the gap between these official releases. And it's true. I mean, can you imagine if we didn't have these 3D companies putting out these parts to kind of sate our appetite a little bit? Luckily, we don't have to imagine that world because we have all that stuff. So that's really, really cool. Joe saying, hope we get wolves in October. I did say it would be creatures, and it is the spooky month. So I would say that the likelihood is pretty good that we're going to see some wolves pretty soon. Amy saying it's a spooky sale. Yeah, I mean, the October sale, if you read the blog post, it mentioned that October is going to be a monstrous sale. I forget exactly what it was that he posted that was a tease. Oh, I know what it was. So the vampire head. If you've looked at the Wolf King sale that's going on right now, every part is available, both painted and unpainted, except for the vampire head. That like creepy, crazy open mouth vampire head is not available painted. And a couple people asked about that. And the reason is Emil Wickman actually said he wanted to paint that as part of the sale, which is super cool. I mean, if you've seen Emil's work, not only his sculpting, his paint work, it's amazing. He's incredible, just all-around artist. The challenge is Emil lives in Sweden and Len lives here in the United States. So to get product to him, there's obviously an extended transit time. I live a few states away from Len, and when he sends me product to paint for a sale, there's definitely, between getting it to me, paying the stuff, and getting it back to him, there's turnaround time. So imagine going all the way to Sweden. So what Len announced as part of that blog post was that head would not be available painted in this sale, but the plan is that it will be painted in a future sale, specifically the October sale that is going to be monster focused. And as my good friend Steven says, it is called Wolf King Customs. The fact that they're doing wolves is no secret. There was a wolf render that was actually shared in one of the emails a short time ago. I know that someone, I forget who, but someone shared it on the Cabal as well. So one of the sculptures has already been out there and teased. If you're part of the mailing list, you certainly had access to see it. But there's some other cool stuff coming, so I'll look forward to that. Other big announcement that I dropped last week, was it last week? I think it was last week that I mentioned LegionsCon being all virtual. I'm pretty positive it was last week. Honestly, these weeks blur. So much stuff has been happening behind the scenes that it becomes a bit of a blur. But yeah, LegionsCon being virtual, that was announced. Still a ton of planning to do for that. I talked about it on the show, and then when I announced it on the Cabal, I did release some of the people that would be involved. So that's super cool. We're still working out all the panels. There's going to be a lot of announcements for that. One I can definitely tell you about. Did I tell this last week? Again, everything blurs from week to week. I forget what I say when I say it. But there is going to be a panel all around the art of Mythos. That Nate Barch and Trevor Williams, 1/6 shooter. I did announce this last week. I'm feeling very repetitive. I feel like I absolutely said this. So this is not news. I've already mentioned this. Well, anyway, there's also going to be a customizing panel. So if you enjoy what I do here, there is going to be a customizing panel as well. I will be sitting on that panel. I know Nikki Nicole Cheney is going to join me as well. Not sure who else will be on that panel, but definitely the two of us have already agreed to be involved. If you did listen to the most recent Legions cast, though, that crew, they talked about LegionsCon a little bit, and they said, yeah, we're going to be involved. We're not sure exactly how. They're going to probably moderate some of the panels. They're going to be different moderators throughout the day to kind of keep it fresh. So they'll probably individually moderate some stuff. Additionally, we're probably going to do a live episode of LegionsCon towards the end of the day. Kind of as a nice way to recap everything we've seen, because we're going to want to recap it. There's going to be some pretty cool stuff. So again, that's in November. Lots more news on that. I do know my partner, Joe Viteri, he is still doing some live shows in the New Jersey area. Now, I'm not even allowed to go to New Jersey. I live here in Rhode Island. And even though we've been doing better with COVID, we're apparently above some threshold. And I'm actually not allowed to travel almost anywhere. Like, I can't go. There's only one New England state. New Hampshire is the only place that will let us in. Even Maine. I was going to go to Maine recently for a couple of days just to go hang out on the beach. And my buddy Tim Sawyer from Maine, I'm like kind of Maine by proxy, right? Travis thought I was from Maine, but apparently I can't go there. So I'm not even allowed to go to New Jersey. But if you live in that tri-state area and you are allowed to travel between those places, I do know that this weekend, I believe it is, that Joe is doing one of his shows. I think he just announced that the actual ToyCon, usually he does ToyCon in spring, and then there's one in November. The one in November is where LegionsCon was attached to last year. Obviously, with this being virtual, there is no virtual ToyCon aspect to what we're doing for LegionsCon. But it looks like he is doing an in-person ToyCon, I think in October at some point. Check out his website, toyconnj.com. You'll get all the information there about the actual shows he's doing. So if you are in that area, yeah, Joe's saying the Wayne Toy Show in Wayne, New Jersey is this weekend. It's the first Sunday of every month. So that is something that Joe is involved with. Awesome guy, great promoter. If you're in the area and you're looking for something to do and it's safe, go check it out. So with that, I think we can jump into the conversation at hand. Again, I'll answer questions along the way. So the PowerCon debut figures, and remember, they're not PowerCon exclusive figures because they are available elsewhere. These two figures were available in the All-Stars 3 pre-order that happened at the start of the year. The idea was that there are two figures that definitely have that Masters of the Universe tribute aspect to them. You've seen it before in the Mythic line. There's a number of these Masters of the Universe style tribute figures that have been used as PowerCon debut figures for years. So the first place you can get them is at PowerCon, but they are available elsewhere. Four Horsemen Studios have made it very, very clear that they want to make all of their products accessible to their fans. So they don't want people that can't travel to a con in California to completely miss out. Definitely appreciate that. With this year, there not being a PowerCon, they put these up for sale on their website for pre-order a couple weekends ago. They were in stock, so they shipped pretty much that same week. Megalopolis did a great job of getting these out. Very, very cool there. So I've got these in hand. I figured it would actually make some sense to talk about these. There's a number of reviews online for these figures, so I'm not necessarily going to do just a full-on review. I did want to talk a little bit about the customizing aspect of these and what they may be good for or may not be good for. Cool. Couple questions here. Shane saying, miniature sculptor converter here, just learned about Mythic Legions and brought my first and pre-ordered 12 more this week. Excited to learn more and see what's up. Shane, welcome to the community. Happy to have you. We apologize in advance for how incredibly addictive this line is. Okay? If you look behind me, these are all Mythic Legions, and I can't even get all the cases in focus in the camera. It is incredibly addictive. Great line. The fact that you pre-ordered 12 more before you even had the first one in hand, I'm not sure if you got the first one in hand and then ordered 12 more. They get better and better over time. And the more you have and the more you can do to combine them and customize them, it is unbelievable. If you're a miniature painter, definitely check out some of the 3D companies that I mentioned at the start of this show: wolfkingcustoms.com, PlanetaryDogToys.com, TealTitan.com, MyActionFigureCustoms.com. Those are a handful. Check them out. Really, really cool stuff. Being able to add those custom unpainted pieces, and if you paint miniatures, being able to paint them up to go with your figures, you're going to have a blast. Trust me. Yeah, so Shane just saying hi. It's also a very, very welcoming community. You would be hard-pressed to find a better group of fans than what they have at Four Horsemen Studios. Okay, so a couple things. Dorina Onerous. So this is obviously the figure that was made somewhat as a She-Ra tribute. Or She-Ra tribute. And I don't have the other heads. I just have the alternate heads. I will say this, that between this figure and Lord Dragul, which is very much the Hordak tribute, of all the Motu tributes, I really think that these are probably the closest spot-on translations to the source characters. These look really, really good. Now, I've said this before, I personally don't like to display them as those characters. Right now, I do have these two displayed in these formats because I haven't thought of anything to do with them yet. But because I also have a display of Masters of the Universe figures, I don't really need these tribute versions in that format. So when I get these, I do actually get them more for the parts and customizing potential. That being said, these two figures look really, really good as designed. And it's funny, the other day I was a little tangent. I was listening to, again, Legions Cast, and they were talking about, Steve was mentioning about how he customizes, but he still has, a lot of the figures intact. Like he still wants one of each. I totally agree. Some people, I think, they see all the customs I do, and they don't realize that that's an add-on to me. I also have every figure that's been released in the line pretty much in the original format. I think that what they are putting out is incredible. So I'm personally not looking at it saying, like, I can improve on that. I personally am saying, hey, I love what they've done. I want to add other stuff around it. This is a figure I'm probably going to leave intact. I really like the design. And furthermore, I think it's going to be a little hard to customize. The reason for that is the skin tone. I saw someone else mention that there's really nothing else. There's no other figure in the line, save maybe Artemis Silvercord, that has a similar skin tone. She has very, very light skin. So because she's got so much fleshy parts, she's got the fleshy upper legs, she's got the upper arms, the top of her neckline, and obviously the face. To try to swap those parts out with other pieces, I think is going to be very difficult. Additionally, these are no new parts. All of the parts in this figure we have on a number of other figures. Even the head was originally on the Freya of Deadhall figure. So this is not a figure, in my opinion, that you're going to get and probably have a ton of customizing potential, which is okay because it looks really, really great out of the box. And especially if you dig the fact that it kind of looks like She-Ra, I think it more than kind of looks at it. I think from a design standpoint, they absolutely nailed it. Now, the other one we have here is this one, the Lord Dragool. So this is a very popular one. It's a vampire. So if you look at the bio that was written for it, they wrote it as like kind of a vampire lord that was passed over by Baron Valagar for rule of the vampire faction. I'm drawing a blank now. Alithia's Brood. So the Alithia's Brood faction, he was passed over in favor of Baron Valagar's daughter, Lucretia. So there's kind of a cool, story in a story there. People like that. And the vampires are very popular as well. Reading some of the comments here where Rosedale was saying, I just opened my first Mythic yesterday and was blown away by the quality and attention to detail. That's interesting, Rosedale, because I know that I've seen you on this show week in and week out. So the fact that you were checking this out and you were part of the community, but you hadn't even opened one yet, that's really, really cool. Out of curiosity, in the chat here, Rosedale, which one did you get first? Which one did you just open? I'm really curious. Steven saying, I hit 100 figures in under a year. The addiction is real. Yeah, I know a lot of people who start this line and they start selling off some of their other stuff, not only to raise money, but to make room for these Mythic Legions. They are really, really addictive. Joe saying, I try really hard not to mess with named characters, try to stick with Legion Builders. Yeah, Legion Builders are the best for customizing the price and the blank slate type stuff. But there are times, again, I have one of everything. So I don't mind if I get a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and so forth of a character to build on that. But there's a number, even outside of the Legion Builders, I would say the Legion Builders are great because they're generic and they're cheaper. But there are also those characters that a lot of people think are like they kind of refer to them as Legion Builders, but they're not. And I wrote an article on Source Horseman about this, and I took a really funny picture. There was a bunch of the not builder characters all hanging out together, holding up a sign that said, "We are not Legion Builders." There's a lot of generic characters that aren't technically Legion Builders. Legion Builders are the figures with the fewer paint apps that are less expensive, that are meant for just doing that. They're meant to build out armies. That was originally why they were created, because they had this vision of people getting multiples and building out almost like diorama style scenes with armies of dwarves or skeletons or knights or so forth. The customizing aspect was always part of Mythic Legions, but I can tell you from talking to all of the horsemen, they never thought it would be as big a part as it is. They never thought the customizing community would embrace this line the way that we all have. It's unprecedented. So there's a number of other figures, Joe, that I know you work with as well. Fury Clan Orc, the Shadow Elf Warrior. Those are not Legion Builders. Those are regular price point figures, but they're generic characters that lend themselves well to those customizing. Anyway, this particular character, few points that I want to make, that I want to point out on him. One of the things is I've seen people putting on the cape a little differently. The one new piece with this figure is his cape. And the way the cape is cut, this kind of like bat wing type cape, it's different than anything they've done on the line. So normally when you get the capes and it's got the 4 holes, I personally like to put all those holes through the shoulder pauldrons. And once again, there's an article on Four Horsemen about how to do this. I like to pop the shoulder pauldron through the hole, then flip it over, pop the second one. Other people I know like to pop the outer holes and they put it actually under the armpits. They pop out the arm and pop it in there. I saw Steve from LegionsCon do that. One of the things that I think you can do with this that's really cool, if you actually look at the prototype photos, they actually put the outer hole around the wrist peg. I didn't want to do it around the wrist because I find the wrists not to be as nice a connector point as this piece right here, that lower arm. So what I did here was I actually put that hole right around the lower arm, and I just popped this right on top. And what that does is it allows the cape to have more of that kind of Batwing style look to it. So if you imagine like Dracula with his cape, he's holding the edges in his hands, and when he kind of, you know, does that bat type piece, that's what I think you can do. If you put it on his arms, you can spread his arms and get more of that Batwing style display. So just a thought. I haven't seen everybody displaying it that way. I hadn't seen somebody else mention it. I thought that it would be good to point out. Another thing I've seen people ask is the Hordak figure, which again, this is a tribute to, has that kind of collar type piece that this shield was meant to represent. When I posted this recently, someone asked me, how did you get that on there? Actually, super simple. So all the shields, the new ones actually, come with the little handle piece that just plugs in. All I did to attach that, I didn't use a back adapter or anything. The pauldron spot right there, it's really, really tight between the pauldrons. If you just slide this right between the pauldrons, it actually stays on. Now, I mean, if you flip it over and shake it, it will fall off. But for display type purposes, it should be more than sufficient for you to wedge that in there and then display your Lord Dragool with that shield and back, actually creating that type look. Cool? Now, one of the questions we had from a customizing standpoint was this blue skin, because this is a cool figure. When these are out in more volume with All Stars 3, this will be a great base to use for customs. We've only ever gotten this head once before on the Carpathia. We've got that head here. It's a great sculpture on the head with some extra paint. That's going to be cool. He's got the armored lower legs and arms. Those are always fun. He's also got the fleshy areas that a lot of people can use. Unfortunately, the blue is a totally different blue than anything else they've done. So this blue here is the Chrono figure, and I painted that head, but this body has had absolutely no paint on it. And if you look at the Chrono, and it's a little tough on screen here, but this actual body, this color here, and this figure here, they are different blues. And it is also a different blue from the Zazar figure. So the blue on the Zazar figure is different as well. Little bit lighter. Some of the highlights on it are different. And it's interesting because like the tips of his horns, the tips of the Zazar horns are actually really, really close to what we have on Lord Dragool. But the highlights that are kind of on the front of the chest and on the front of the legs, those are a little bit different. So he's coming in that same wave as well. He is coming in All Stars 3. Now, obviously, he's got the bare arms, the bare legs. If for whatever reason you did want to use a bare torso, you could probably fudge it in, but they're not exact. So I know that was one of the questions a lot of people had with these figures. I know I had it up front because sometimes when you look at the photos online, you can't tell exactly how the colors are. You're not looking at the new and old figures side by side. So unfortunately, from a customizing standpoint, it doesn't look like we're going to be bouncing them together. I don't see either of these two these two figures being the really provider of custom parts the way that the last two Motu figures were. The Chrono and the Purpler have been so helpful in terms of people buying them and repainting those bodies into, orcs and barbarians and so forth. I don't see these being used the same way, but these two out of the box look wonderful. Definitely hit the character points they're trying to go for the Shi'ar and Hordak. 2 thumbs up. Very, very cool. Let's see what we've got here. So Rosedale answered my question. He said that Gwendolyn Heavensbrand was the first one he got. I also have 7 others just sitting in their boxes. I've been so busy with work, I haven't had time to open them yet. Get on that. For next week, we want you to open at least 2 more. We want to hear what you think about them. And open some different ones. So you've got a female knight figure. Very, very cool one. I don't know what else you have that's waiting on, but if you've got some other stuff that's different kinds of characters, certainly different body types, open those as well. If you're really like that first one, seeing the variety is going to be really, really cool for you. Shane saying he's going to try to do the opposite and bump up the red, going to do more of that classic Dracula muscle armor. Yeah, that's actually a cool idea. That's very, very cool. I've been collecting for 25 years and I'd reached a point of stagnation. Mythic Legions breathed new life into my collecting. Yeah, it did the same for me. I've been collecting for quite a few years as well, and I was definitely slowing down before the Ravens Kickstarter. The Ravens Kickstarter is what got me going again. I collected Four Horsemen Studios for years, obviously even before Four Horsemen when they were at McFarlane, I collected them. But that Ravens Gothotropolis Kickstarter definitely got me interested in the studio again. And then that just led right into, that was fulfilled. They shipped those right around the time that Mythic Legions 1 Kickstarter hit. So that was obviously a wonderful time. Steven's saying that's the wrong way to do the cape. It has to be my way. Sorry, buddy. But the official photos actually show it different than both of us. So let's just agree that we're both wrong. Okay, so let's move on to the actual customizing topic. I mentioned at the top of the show that last week we talked big. We talked about the ogre scale figures. One of the great things about Mythic Legions, for all of you new collectors, is the variety of sizes. Because it is a fantasy line, and they definitely do touch on a lot of those fantasy tropes, we've got orcs and humans and elves and goblins. We've got all vampires, demons, minotaur. We've got all of these different races. The nice thing is they started giving us other sizes as well, like the trolls. So those huge trolls that they released, honestly, all the way back in Mythic Legions 1.5. So the second wave we got, that first wave included, the dwarf size figures, and all the other figures were kind of the same scale. The demons, the humans, the barbarians, the knights, the skeletons from that line. Those were all the same scale. Then you had dwarves. The dwarves are actually the same body parts. They're part of the same library as all those other figures I just mentioned. It's just their lower arms and their legs that are shorter that gives them that shorter stature. But since then, we got the trolls. We got all of the figures in Advent of Decay that we typically know as the 2.0 figures, the elves and the females and the goblins. Now we've got the ogres. That's really, really cool. They've been going up in size. They've given us these different scales. Well, they've said in the past that they also want to go down in size. They definitely have a desire at some point to do smaller scale figures, things like pixies and fairies and gnomes and so forth. Adding those other type of figures into the line, that's really, really cool. That's the kind of stuff that gets me excited because, as I've said many, many times on this show, I'm an old school Dungeons and Dragons kid. I grew up playing D&D, so this incredibly diverse world is what really appeals to me. So being impatient, I've created a number of those size figures myself. And admittedly, this is a little atypical of me. When I do Mythic Legions customizing, I like to use Mythic Legions parts. I use a ton of other parts too. I obviously integrate Lord of the Rings and World of Warcraft and you name it. I integrate a ton of lines. If you watch this show, if you watch some of my back episodes, you'll see that I use figures from a wide range. Not only stuff you'd expect like Lord of the Rings and Warcraft, but I've used parts from like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer figures and Muppets. I use Muppets parts all the time. I use a wide range of things in my work. But I always try to use Mythic Legions figures because I want there to be that connection. A lot of what we're going to look at today, I think it blends really well with Mythic Legions, but they're not, for the most part, actual Mythic Legions figures because we don't have figures that are this size. I'm okay with this personally. This is a personal decision. I know there's a lot of people that fudge in a lot of other lines, especially new collectors that, as they're trying to build up their Mythic Legions display, they're looking at other lines to say, hey, some of these figures, on the aftermarket, they definitely get expensive. So they're starting to say, what figures can I buy that are more readily available, less expensive, that I can fudge into my line and build out the display? That's totally cool. Not something I love to do personally, but again, with this much, I don't have room to do it anyway. I've got to be selective. But these are some that I do actually like that bring that small variety. So let's look at some of them. And the first line that I'm going to look at is one that I've seen a lot of people ask about. And these are the Vitruvian Hax figures from Boss Fight Studios. So these figures are not the 1/12 6-inch, 7-inch scale that Mythic Legions are. These are 1/18 scale figures. So basically what I mean by that is these are, as opposed to 7-inch, these are these little 3 3/4 inch figures, okay? This is actually the size that Mythic Legions were originally supposed to be. If you know the history, Mythic Legions was originally supposed to be this scale, in part because what I talked about earlier, this idea of building out giant armies. They imagined being able to do it easier with this style figure, this size figure, and the idea of horses and monsters and everything being to this scale was more palatable. Well, as history tells us, what ended up happening was they had so much success with the 7-inch Kickstarter for the Ravens. And when they got the pricing from the factory for the 4-inch figures and they compared it to what it would cost for 7-inch figures, they were almost identical. They really felt that this was more bang for your buck. This was where the collector market was headed anyway. Remember, this was a time when probably Star Wars Black Series was just getting started. Obviously, G.I. Joe Classified was many years away. The industry as a whole has gone to 6-7 inch anyway. So it's good that they did that. I know a lot of collectors are really excited that they took that leap. There are still some that wish they were these. I'm a pure 7-inch, 6-inch, 7-inch collector, so I'm happy. But these particular figures, some of them I think work. I have a couple people here saying that Anthony loves the hacks on the table. Anthony says, I quit hacks for Legions. Yeah, I'm going to be totally honest. I've never been a huge fan of hacks. But again, I don't like this size figure. So I'm almost predetermined not to like this line. And it kills me because their designs are gorgeous. Like Boss Fight Studios, their designs they've come up with, I've seen a number of figures in the fantasy line that I'm just, if they just had done that as a 7-inch figure, I would have been so all over it. That being said, I have gotten a couple specifically to use for these. If you're used to the Mythic Legions quality, the size, these quality-wise, they're really good. The paints are gorgeous. I do sometimes find the facial expressions not to be that great. They are working at a smaller scale. That does get hard. I've seen more like poorly painted eyes on this line than I see on Mythic Legions. But if you take your time and actually hunt down the ones you want, you can find great examples. So this is one that I use. This is like one of their elf figures. And they've done a couple different elves. This is one that I picked up a while ago. This is definitely from an older wave. What I had originally done with this was I had used a couple little wings. So oddly enough, these were from a Littlest Pet Shop figure that my daughter had, that one of her Littlest Pet Shop dragonfly figures a couple years ago sacrificed their wings. And at one point, I had kind of glued those wings onto the back of the figure. And I'll just kind of put it there, kind of create like a little fairy, like a little pixie type character. I thought that was cool. She's taken a dive recently and those fell off, the glue released. So I got to put them back on. But if you're looking for, again, like a pixie type character, these figures I think are a really good size. They'll work well with your Mythic Legions. And I have a few others here as well. So this is another one. This is, they actually call this a cavern fairy. So I had bought this one originally. She comes with two sets of wings, one that are more extended and then these that are a little, pulled in. The pegs in back, they're a little small for the peg holes in back of a Mythic Legions figure, but if you drill a little hole inside the hole on Mythic Legions, you can peg these in. I actually originally bought this to use those extra wings. I had done an imp figure that my friend Richard in the UK now has, but I had done an imp figure that I wanted these bat demony style wings, and they couldn't be big. They had to be somewhat small. So this worked really well. But the cool thing is because she came with two pairs of wings, I was still able to display this that way. So I kind of treat this one as almost like a dark pixie. Like in my display, I have my elves and my woodland characters, and then I have my dark elves, the shadow elves, and she's on display with the shadow elves. Very, very cool. The last one that I have there, this is one that I actually put together. So at one point, I wanted to create kind of a Ratman type character. I know some people call this a Skaven. Skaven is from, I'm not even sure what it's from, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's, I don't think it's Warcraft. So I don't know if that's Warhammer. Skaven might be a Warhammer thing, but these like rat creatures. I wanted to do one of those. I mean, I have since done rat characters. Yeah, so Shane is saying it is Warhammer, Ryan as well. I've done some other rat figures since then that are larger scale that use some of the heads from, I believe is it Lee Robinson that did those heads, I believe. Very, very cool. I've put those, they go on Mythic Legions goblin bodies. But before I did that, I put this character together, this kind of Ratman character. And this uses like the human mage body with, they have some like add-on kits. So they did this add-on kit for this rat. And I put that on. I got a little Halloween decoration and got the rat tail and glued that in there. But this was my first little Skaven character. And again, really small, works nicely. If you put him next to like a human wizard, he works nicely as like a little minion type character. So that is one line that I would suggest you might want to check out. Now, they're not inexpensive, especially ones that are sold out. They can get up there in price. But even original retail, I mean, hacks cost what, like $20? So they're not inexpensive figures. They're well painted. They come with some really cool parts. They do sell blanks and everything like that. So if you are predisposed and you want to actually customize some of the hacks, you can do that as well. But those are a few, that's one line that I've tapped into specifically to get these smaller figures. So a bunch of people talking about hacks, a couple people saying they quit hacks for Legions. Yeah, I hear that a lot actually. Blue Collar saying, does anyone have a hard time posing Dragool's head? It's a little tight. Yeah, I found that too. Rosedale, I'm constantly looking what I can buy and customize enough to get into Mythic Legions. Yeah, like I said, it's a popular thing. I mean, I only went away from that because of the volume. Rosedale say, I didn't find out they were 7-inch until second wave. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I remember that right from the beginning because I remember being bummed that they were 4-inch figures, and I was like, maybe I'll get one or two just to support the studio. And this was obviously long before I was working with them. So I was personally thrilled when they went to that wave. All right, other stuff that we can look at. So today I showed a gnome. To me, gnomes are kind of like that size between dwarves and I guess pixies and stuff. So here's a dwarf. This is a Mythic Legions dwarf figure. And this is the gnome that I posted today. So you can see he's a little bit smaller. Not wildly slow, but a little bit smaller. Now, this is the figure that I mentioned. So this particular head, this is the one that's available right now from wolfkingcustoms.com as part of their sale. So this was sculpted by Emil Wickman. You can get this painted or unpainted right now. It's a different paint scheme than I have here. This was one that I was sent to test out and play around with, and I painted it up. And I just, for whatever reason, when I first saw it, he looked more like a gnome to me. So I wanted to play around with that idea. And I happen to have this body. So this body is from a line that I've talked about on the show before. It's an old line called Shadowrun, apparently based on some game. There was like a gamification element to the toy line. I don't really understand it, but there's a couple cool figures in the Shadowrun line, including this dwarf. His name is Draven von Dreekill, I believe it is. Really, really cool figure. A lot of times I actually use the head in a custom. I like the head on a dwarf body, but I had the body left over, and I like the fact it's not as articulated as Mythic Legions, but it's really well detailed. Like the quality of the figure detail-wise is really, really good. So I ended up doing that. He's got a regular neck peg. What I ended up doing was I actually broke the neck peg out, and then I attached just a Mythic Legions neck peg in there. It's honestly just in there with a little bit of blue tack, but it's super solid. And then that allowed me to put the painted head on there. And that allowed me to create this little gnome miner. This actual pickaxe is a little tease of a future piece from Wolf King. But this is not the first gnome that I've done. So I've actually done a couple other gnomes before. And I'm going to show those now. And I'm going to show, interestingly, the base figures I use. So this was the first gnome that I ever did. And this actually uses an interesting combination of parts. I've shown him on the show before. The head is actually from a Lord of the Rings Radagast figure. This was the Hobbit line. This was, I said Lord of the Rings, actually the Hobbit line that came out. So it's not Toy Biz. It was, I don't even know, it was Playmates maybe. Whoever did the Hobbit style figures, they did both 3 3/4 inch, and they did a limited amount of like 6 inch. Radagast from the 6 inch line. It's a cool head. I use that, but you can see that his red cap, that is actually from a Mythic Legion snag figure. So even though these figures don't use Mythic Legion's bodies, for a while it was really important to me, and it still is, to try to at least work in a Mythic Legion's part. I like the fact that that ties it in. So I did that, and he's got, I mean, this is a fodder bin. He's got some goggles on here. His little glasses there are actually from like a Star Wars Black Series Maz Katana, whatever, the little diminutive character. I use that body back there too. This giant wrench is from a Zevos figure, but the base body on this, that's what I want to talk about. The base body is a Lord of the Rings Hobbit figure. So Lord of the Rings figures, you know that I use these all the time for their parts. These are examples where I'm actually using the entire base body. Now, the hobbits from Mythic Legion, from Lord of the Rings, I think they're hard to use in Mythic Legions because they look so much like hobbits. They have the bare feet. So unless you're trying to create a halfling, you know, an actual hobbit in Mythic Legions, I find these really difficult to use. And as I've said before, I don't like to use parts. If I'm using this, it looks absolutely like Samwise Gamgee to me because that's who it is. So I have a hard time fudging this into my line. That being said, these two figures that they released, these are Sam and Frodo in goblin disguise. So these two figures are the scene where they're kind of trying to sneak their way through Mordor, and they've got these outfits that they've taken from presumably some goblins. Um, these are great figures because they have their feet are covered. They look like they're wrapped. They work well. I like using these for these diminutive characters. And that's what I did here. Now, in this particular one, I used the one of Frodo. He's got the bare arms. That's okay. I was fine with that because this is a character that can have bare skin. It's not like it's a creature that wouldn't have flesh tone where I'd have to paint those or something. So this was one I put together that scales really, really well, I think, with Mythic Legions figures if I'm looking for that gnome style character. Show you with the dwarf. So I made this one, and then this is my gnome tinker, and I wanted to make a female gnome tinker to go with him. So I mentioned that Maz Katana type figure, I had used some of that. I used the goggles. So I ended up using the body on that figure here. And the head is actually, I always loved this head. That is a Marvel Legends Nico figure. Always thought it was a really cool, had no idea who the character was, but really liked the sculpt. And while I find that Marvel Legends heads don't work wonderfully with Mythic Legions, the weird proportions of a gnome, small body, slightly oversized head, it really seemed to work for me on this. And if you notice, I even have that Mythic Legions shoulder armor piece there. Once again, just as a way to work that in. And she's got a crazy amount of stuff. This little pouch is from a Lord of the Rings figure. The scarf is from a Lord of the Rings figure. This is an example of don't throw anything away. I bought this Maz figure on clearance for probably $4. And I bought it because she came with that little treasure chest. So I used that in like diorama, photographs and stuff. And I kind of just threw the figure in my fodder bin. I was like, I'm never going to use this. And then I ended up using those goggles for that gnome. And then I used the body for this. Don't throw things away. You would be amazed what use you find for them later. One more gnome that I did a whole series of pirate characters, and I wanted to not only create my pirate captains, but I also had a pirate crew, and this is one of the pirates that I did. So this uses the Samwise body, but what I did was I had this other jacket that, quite honestly, I'm not even positive where it came from. I think it actually this came from another Hobbit figure. So a lot of these Hobbits, what you'll find on them is even if the figure itself is not great to use as is, all of these rubber jackets are separate pieces. So you can remove that rubber jacket. And in this case, I put that rubber jacket on top of that body. Okay. This hood is from an Articulated Icons ninja figure. This head is actually from a World of Warcraft figure. I pulled that off and drilled that out and put that on here. And he's even got a little, yo-ho-ho bottle of rum. He's a pirate after all. That came from a Nightmare Before Christmas Sally figure, but completes the look for this little gnome character. And when I display this character, again, these are spread out across this entire display. So they work really well because they're on a Detolf shelf with all other Mythic Legions figures. And just having this one character there, it doesn't look wildly out of place, and it provides that nice size contrast. I'm going to check some of the comments here. You need a pointed hat for your gnome. Well, I mean, this is close enough. I didn't want to go with like the whole Travelocity roaming gnome type look. That's what I didn't want to go that on the nose with it. That was what I was thinking about with this one, though. This is kind of like a good combination of still having that red cap without it being like, a cone on top of the head. Great one saying, is there a good place where I can commission custom figures? I'd like to get a 3D head print for each of the figures. If you're looking to hire someone to make 3D heads for you, I don't know a lot of people that are actually taking commissions for stuff like that. Obviously, there's all of the 3D companies that I mentioned at the top of this show, but they don't take commissions. They're not going to actually, digitally sculpt something based on what you're asking for and do something like that. I don't know anyone that's doing that. Your probably best bet is trying to find a digital artist on something like Fiverr or whatever and commission that. So Ryan was responding to my Shadowrun. He was saying that it's a table type RPG that got some PC games. Yeah, they're pretty fun. Yeah, they did make figures, actually a couple series of figures. I think there's 2 series that are pretty easy to get, and there might be a 3rd series that's a little bit harder to find, but there's a number of figures, and they're a weird combination of fantasy and real world. All of the orcish type characters are like gangsters and bouncers and stuff. Again, I didn't know what it's from, but there are definitely some figures. Those are the ones that I've integrated into my collection, but definitely worth checking out. Awesome. Anthony's saying he's going to make a gnome. Yes, you do. Okay, let's look at some other stuff. This one's just good to look at. We're talking about hobbits. So long before Peter Jackson did Lord of the Rings and Toy Biz did the line, there was a Lord of the Rings line that was put out by a company called Toy Vault. Obviously, the figures themselves were based more on the books and the descriptions of the characters from the books versus the movies that didn't exist yet. They're also not based on any of the old Rankin Bass animations or anything like that. They're just kind of original interpretations of the characters. They're a very, very mixed bag. So the Balrog looks horrible. The wings on the Balrog are really, really cool, and I've used those in a number of customs, but the figure itself is really bad looking. There's a number of others that just aren't wonderful quality, but they've got some cool parts. For whatever reason, the character of Frodo, I always found it to be a really good figure. The sculpture on it looks good. It's really clean. There's a number of versions of it. This one is my favorite. There's a number of variant colors. This one happens to be my favorite. I think the paints are really good. The sculpture is really good. So I actually use this in my display as a halfling. And the reason it works for me is because it's an original interpretation of the character. I don't look at it and see, what's the guy's Elijah Wood. I don't look at it and see Elijah Wood. I just see a halfling. It's generic to me. So that's another thing. And this is not customized at all. This is literally out of the box as is. One of the few out of the box as is non-Mythic Legions figures that I display with my Legions. Very cool. Check that out. Back to that Shadowrun figure that we looked at earlier. So this particular figure, this entire body, the piece I have around his chest is actually from a DC figure, but this entire figure pretty much came like this. He had a couple of shoulder pads and obviously a different head, but the body itself was like this. I did not alter the body on this. Well, this is not the first time I've actually had this figure in my collection. I've messed around with the body before. I've used it for customs. One of the other figures I did with it, now this I actually do display with my dwarves, but it's a little bit of a shorter stature dwarf, which I kind of liked. So this uses a number of pieces. This head is actually another Shadowrun figure, another Shadowrun dwarf they did. He's got all these crazy goggles and stuff. So I kind of made this to be a bit of like a minor type dwarf. But what I did was I took that body, I broke it at the waist. Breaking it at the waist, it obviously wouldn't connect to the Mythic Legions. So I started to get creative and say, how can I actually put this together? So what I did was I screwed a little screw in there. And then you're not going to get to see it, but I actually screwed a screw up in there as well. And I used one of these really, really strong magnets. So there's a screw in either side and a magnet between them. Now, if I hold it upside down, actually, it does stay. So there you go. It's strong enough that it actually stays, and I can still move it. Kind of just a creative way to combine things. And actually, his head is combined that same way. His head, there's a screw in there. There's a magnet shoved into the bottom there, and it just magnets right on, but still maintains movement and stuff like that. So this is another example. This pouches he has across his chest, that came from one of those figures. It's a rubbery piece that I just put right on top of a Mythic Legion's body. So you can do cool stuff. You can find pieces like that and combine stuff together to create different sizes. Masters of the Universe. So the Masters of the Universe Classics line from Mattel were the first outside of Mythic Legions figures that I brought in to Mythic Legions. I've talked about this before. It made a lot of sense. Four Horsemen Studios were instrumental in Masters of the Universe Classics. So those particular figures have a really similar sensibility. A lot of them don't, obviously mix and match. Some of them, I think the heads work really, really well, but the detail, the attention to detail, I think is consistent. You can see Eric and Four Horsemen Studios' vision across both lines. I really felt that certain classics pieces worked wonderfully with Mythic Legions right out of the gate. One of the parts that I found that worked well outside of heads were a couple bodies that I used when I first started trying to make smaller figures. And one of the first ones I did was this character. So this is my version of the Wizard Dwarf Joran Runeshaper. So I always had a problem with Joran. Joran Runeshaper was part of the first Kickstarter wave, and he was obviously a magic user dwarf. The challenge with Mythic Legions, and especially with the first wave, was they built everything from that limited parts library, which is incredibly impressive. But it forced them to make certain character stylistic decisions, including the fact that the magic using dwarf Joran came in like heavy plate style armor. Now, dwarf or not, that's just not how I imagine a magic user looking. And I know that there's like that subclass of, like a sword mage that, they can use spells and a sword. Yeah, I get that. But the generic wizard type character, that trope, that fantasy trope of a wizard, I picture it in a robe. So one of the first things that I did with Joran Runeshaper was I pulled off his head. I put on the alternate head because he looks awesome as just a little blue knight. But I used it on this body. And this body is a Masters of the Universe Classics Gwildor figure. So that character that was from the live action Masters of the Universe movie, what I did was, and the body is pretty much exactly, I didn't do anything to the body in this case. I just pulled off the head and I popped this one on instead. And actually this one has just a little bit of blue tack in there because the peg on Masters of the Universe bodies are, obviously smaller than the holes in Mythic Legions. A little bit of blue putty, and that holds that in place. And I had the additional advantage of it actually, I should put him on this side because he's got his big hammer there. He stands a little bit shorter. He actually stands about the size of the gnomes. But I made this before I was making gnomes, and I do display him with my dwarves as just a smaller statured dwarf. I used that exact same body, but I did some repaint to it for this figure. So this was actually my very first goblin. While I was waiting for Advent of Decay to arrive, when Advent of Decay, when that Kickstarter ran, so exciting to see all those reveals. My favorite figures, the figures I was most excited for Advent of Decay were the goblins. When they started showing those figures, I immediately wanted a whole army of them. And I've since customized an entire case behind me of just goblins. But the first goblin I did, and I actually completed this about a month before Advent of Decay actually hit, before we actually had it in hand. I got these parts and put this together. This uses that Gwildor body, but what I did was actually use a head from another Masters of the Universe Classics figure. I've talked about this head in the past. This is the unnamed one. So the unnamed one came with two different heads, and it's got these big goblin-like ears. They're normally blue, kind of like the color that Orko has. But I painted them green. I painted the part that you can see in his face green there. And actually his hands, I just pulled the hands out of Gwildor because they move at the wrists. And these came from another figure that Four Horsemen Studios had, some say in, there's some work on. These came from the DC Universe Classics line. This was one of the Green Lantern type figures. I think the character's name might have been Low. Regardless, it was like a blue alien. These were originally blue hands that I painted green. But the best part was they pegged right into these arms. They were meant to be removable. That particular Green Lantern figure came with different hands and different heads, so you can make different members of the Green Lantern Corps. I popped them right in here, and they still retain all the articulation. I did paint, if you look at this figure here, you can see that this version of Gwildor's robe, which is unpainted, has those red highlights. So this one I painted over those red highlights so it would look a little bit different. And I actually, drilled a couple holes to use the shoulder pauldrons here. But another way to create a different size character, in this case for the goblins. So the last thing I'm going to talk about here is a different kind of race. We've looked at gnomes, we've looked at some pixies and fairies, some other ways to do dwarves. One of the things I like to do is either using dwarf bodies or goblin bodies to bring in more like of fae type characters. So down the road, I want to do a whole show just about kind of the fair folk, the different fairy characters, but I'll show a couple of them today that use some of these smaller bodies. Now, with my fae folk, I have obviously the elves. So I've got the Lord Adon and the Artemis Silvercord. I have all of those figures, but then I also have like Thistlethorn. So that smaller figure and Faunus figure, those, I've already got some nice scale going on in that display. Being able to add these, I think, works as well. So one of the things you can do is, I've talked before about the Borrier figure. If you take the Borrier figure and swap out the hooves and you put regular feet in, you can use that Borrier body as a dwarf. Well, that same kind of recipe works in reverse. If you put hooves on to any of the dwarf bodies, you can create like this dwarf style satyr type figure. So this uses a beautiful custom head from Matt O'Toole at Castle of Power. This is one that he actually cast and painted. I got it directly from Matt. And I use this to create this kind of interesting faun, satyr, whatever, fairy type character. Looks great next to like Faunus and so forth. You can do the same thing. You can also put those hooves, remember those 1.0 style feet, while the ankle pegs, like the part of the ankle that goes into the lower leg, those are different from 1.0 and 2.0. But the peg that goes into the foot itself, they're essentially identical. So you can take 1.0 feet and put it on a 2.0 body. I've shown this in the past with goblins, putting like big chunky 1.0 feet on a goblin. Well, in this particular case, this is my Puck. So I made this, if you've ever seen Midsummer Night's Dream, the character of Puck, this mischievous type character, this is how I picture him. And this is a King Noglin body that's got those hooves added. This head is a custom cast I found on eBay from the character, from the artist G.I. Joe Eben. It was actually meant to be a John Byrne Beast figure, but it just looked like a cool, mischievous Puck type character. I even used the tail from Borrier there to give him that aspect as well. And then the ornate armor that he's got on his shoulders, that was in the fodder bin. It came from a Spawn figure. So even just combining parts like this, like the head's a little too big, the feet are a little too big. But for a character like that, a Fae type character, I think it works really, really well. It creates that almost weird sense of proportions. Last one I'll look at. This is one that a number of people have really dug. This is a character I call a Spriggan. So a Spriggan is like a very Celtic type forest sprite. They're typically depicted as old, like grumpy looking men. This particular head came from Saba and Julie at Planetary Dog Toys. I think they actually said that it was meant to be something of a cat type character. It almost has like a feline type quality. I never generally saw that in it. I just thought it was a cool sculpture. This is one that I bought. A lot of times when I buy 3D parts, I know exactly how I'm going to use them. But occasionally, I just think it's a cool looking piece. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to use that, but I definitely want to grab it. Especially if I'm buying other stuff that I do know how I'm going to use. This is like a perfect add-on. This was something I added into my cart. And once I got it in, I wasn't sure how I was going to use it. But once I started putting this together, it just came out to be this really fun little character. And once again, it's a lot smaller than a lot of the other characters in that part of my display, and it provides that nice sense of scale. Last thing I'll show you, we looked at Boss Fight Studios Hacks figures. We looked at some Lord of the Rings figures, both from Toy Biz and from the Toy Vault line. One other figure, Master of the Universe, whatever. Another figure that if you stumble upon, I've never used this for a custom yet, but I know that it could be valuable at some point, is this Black Series Jawa. So the Black Series Jawa normally comes with waist belts. This is one that I got in like a lot of loose parts. The waist belts were already removed. He does still have his kind of belt here with a little, it looks like, actually it looks like a lightsaber in it right now, but it's supposed to be his little pistol. You could easily remove that, or you could use that for like a knife or something. Obviously, the head is very Jawa-like, but the head pops right off. You could easily pop that head off. You could easily do something else with it. Have some fun with that. The fact that it's in a robe type character, this could have some flexibility. You could absolutely do something with this. So this is another small figure that if you find this, like this is the kind of thing that you go to a toy show, if you can go to a live toy show, you see this in a loose bin for a couple bucks. This is the perfect type of thing to buy, throw it into your fodder bin, because who knows when you'll have an idea that you will want to tap into that little style figure to add a gnome or a kobold or some other little small diminutive character that will help you build out the diversity of your version of Mythos. That's what I've got for tonight. Got a few minutes left. If you want, I'm going to check the questions in a minute, but if you have any additional questions, hit me up. It's time for us to chat. Yeah, Steve saying I need to dust off a couple of the Shadowruns figure for dwarf and gnome bodies. Yeah, all those dwarf heads coming out. Like I said, I mean, that was one of the reasons why I did this was I was painting this, and it's interesting. I generally don't like painting realistic looking things like this. This particular head was a joy to paint. I really, really enjoyed doing it. But when I was done, originally I was going to put this on an extra Joran rune shape of body I had, and I put it on there, and it was cool. I mean, it's funny, he's got a monocle, and I remember Len kept calling him the accountant dwarf. So at first I wanted to actually make him an accountant, and I was trying to find a way to put him on some kind of body that made him look like he was in a suit or something. Actually, this particular figure, this overlay piece he has, it's rubber. It actually comes off. I've pulled it off before and used that rubber piece on a different figure to add some bulk. So I was originally thinking of doing that, but when I popped this head on the body as is, I just liked it so much that I ended up allowing my plans to change, which I think is an important lesson. You know, sometimes you may go and you may sit down and you have an idea of how that custom is going to come out, of what you're trying to create, but be open to those happy accidents. Be open to those times where you say like, hey, I'm going to pop this head on this body just so I have something to put it on right now. This is a fodder body I have there. I'm just going to put it there as a placeholder. And then you look at it and you go, that looks kind of cool, actually. Let those moments of serendipity happen. Allow those moments where you just created something by accident. That's cool. That's part of the process. Allow that to happen. You can always buy another version of it and finish the custom you had in mind later. But that's exactly how that figure came about. Rosedale saying magnetic joints are awesome. It's not something I do a lot, honestly, but the few times I've done it, it's solved the problem. There have been a couple instances where I need to attach two pieces and they just don't go together. I have two options. I can glue it. If I just glue it in place and lose any joint that would be there, any articulation, that's certainly an option. It's not like I'm playing with these. But there are instances like when I do a photo shoot, maybe I do want to change the pose a little bit. So those instances where I am able to use a magnet and a screw or something and maintain that movement, that's always fun. Greg saying, if you could redo any of your customs over again, which would it be? I mean, I do that all the time. I'm constantly, if not redoing them, but I'm constantly going back to figures and improving them or adding new parts to them. But if I had to just start over and redo any custom, I gotta look around. The one I will say that I've never been 100% happy with is my gargoyle. So I saw Eric LeBron copy my gargoyle recipe. Fine that he did that. He actually reached out to me first. And I've long said I don't ever have any problem with anyone copying my recipes. I certainly ask that they, tag me as the source of inspiration if they decide to post them. But when I did that gargoyle, I did it actually in advance of the first time I went to G-Con. I debuted it there. And it's a really cool looking figure, but it's one of my earlier pieces. And it's one of those figures that in hand isn't as together as it looks in the photos. The way the hands are attached, the hands are just attached with like some putty. So they stay in place, but if you pose them, they're going to fall out and you just got to re-putty them back in. And there's a couple pieces like that on it. The way that the horns are attached, they're just kind of there. I considered like drilling and recessing the holes, but at the time, the head that I used on that was a Masters of the Universe Classics 200X style or 2000X style whiplash. I only had one of them. I was terrified that if I drill in and ruin it, I would ruin the idea. So I took the path of least resistance. And it's always been one that I look at and say, you know what? There are definitely some improvements I could make on that. So there you go. That's your answer. If I had to redo one of them or improve one of them, it would probably be my gargoyle. Anthony, do you ever look at your toy? Do you ever look at a toy your kids get and say, how, Jesus, I'm sorry, I'm pulling a Travis right now. You ever look at a toy your kids get and say how that would make for great fodder at some point? Oh yeah, I mean, I just showed you that these wings on my pixie came from a Littlest Pet Shop dragonfly. I used to buy my daughter when she was into Littlest Pet Shop. She's moved on from that. But I bought them in bulk because you could go on eBay and buy lots of like 100 of them way cheaper than it would be if I went to the store to buy them. So I would buy her these big giant lots and they'd come in and they'd have like, they'd be mixed quality. Some of them would be played with and scuffed up. This was one that I remember actually being a little dirty to begin with. So she wasn't real sad. And I think she probably had 12 dragonflies. But absolutely, there have been times that I look at them. My son actually collects Mythic Legions. So there have been times that he has a figure that I absolutely need from a fodder standpoint, and I've gone up and been like, hey, you want a wheel and deal? And we've actually traded. I've actually made customs for him. He's really into Japanese culture as I am. So he's really into samurai and all that, where he's been like, hey, will you make me a samurai ogre? If you want, I'll trade you these couple figures. So I've done that with him a number of times as well. So yes, Anthony, I have done that. Joe saying imaginet weapons are good, stuffed animals. Yeah, you can get. I know a lot. I've never done that. I know a lot of people use stuffed animals to skin them, for lack of a better term, to use those as like capes and fur cloaks and things like that. Awesome. Frank, I don't know if you're asking me what my favorite Shadowrun class is, but I don't know how to answer that because I don't know Shadowrun. I can answer what my favorite Dungeons and Dragons class is, and that would be a rogue. I always played a rogue. If you look at my website, there's actually a figure that I posted of me. So my good friend Dennis Derby commissioned Saba and Julie at Planetary Dog Toys to actually do a sculpture of me, which was really weird to actually get a little head of myself in. But when I got that figure in and I had it painted by Kurt Daniels, Camaro Dukes, I didn't want to paint it myself. I always in Dungeons and Dragons would play when I was a kid, they wasn't even called a rogue, it was called a thief. But they've kind of evolved that to be the rogue class, and there's different versions of it. But that's my Mythic Legions figure of me as kind of like a charlatan rogue type character. I imagine him being a bit of a presenter, I guess. That's in line with who I am, right? I'm in marketing and digital stuff, so part of my job is to help convince people of certain things. So I figured that worked well. So the charlatan kind of rogue class, that's what I like from Dungeons and Dragons. Not Shadowrun, but hopefully I answered your question. And he just happened to be right behind me. So with that, I think I'm going to call it an evening. Thank you all very much for joining. As my friend Drew likes to say, I will be back here next week. Same Mythic time, same Mythic channel. Not sure what the topic will be, but tune in next week and we'll see. Until then, I look forward to that conversation.